All right, thank you. Just a slight correction, Foundation for Public Code. We were just talking about public goods. This is slightly different. There's overlap, but not exactly the same. And these slides have some links in it. You don't need to try to write what I have here or take photos. They're available online on this link, and I just tweeted it with official hashtag, so if you find it there, that'll be good. So, I'm going to talk today about why does public code need a standard? And to get to that, I also need to sort of, I feel, answer the implicit question like, why do we need public code in the first place? So to do that, I want to take you back in time a little bit and get a little bit philosophical. In a way, code is really about processes, and the city in itself is perhaps one of the longest running continuous process that humans have created. And as the city has evolved over time, so has also the technology that we use. In the last several decades, we've seen a rapid acceleration of technological innovation involving software services at a societal scale. But perhaps rather we can think about this exponential pace to now get to the hockey stick part. So we sort of like, oh, this is not linear acceleration anymore. We can really see that it's going faster. And that sometimes is described by or debated as a disruption on the current processes and technologies. And some of these disruptions lies behind the digital transformation that has been going on for quite some time now. So now we ask, is software becoming infrastructure? This is sort of like how we always have operated. Humans invent things all the time. And for the first 30 years or so, we call them technology. And then if they work and stick around, they're sort of getting into infrastructure. And this is not just only a play with words, calling it this or that, but if it becomes infrastructure, there's a total different set of actors that are expected to stand behind it and be involved in the provisioning of this. And cities has always been sort of like a site that turn technology into infrastructure for the benefit of the society in that city. And I use cities here as a shorthand. In some places, it might be the municipality. In others, another low-level administrative unit. But I'm going to keep using cities as one word here, so keep that in mind. I mean all different low levels here. And some of these forward-thinking cities are already transforming technology into the infrastructure. And they do this through iterating through policy, or you can also call it like a civic code, to speak. And this policy, this civic code, is the set of rules determined through a public governance model that defines the possibility space in your society. What are we allowing people to do? What do we want people to put their interest and time and energy into? And there's been a lot of things through the society made civic and policy. We fought for those things. Obviously various civil rights, but now we regulate everything from trade, property, and infrastructure. And now we ask then, software. Can we open up a new possibility space if software becomes infrastructure? Because if we think about how we have the policy today and the way it interacts with software, can we honestly call it a fully immersed digital society? Most cases, the way policy affects software is uninformed and vague. Even though we see a lot of attempts, and for example, with the recent Cyber Resiliency Act in the EU, we see more and more of this. And as a little side note, I had to stick this slide in. In our most recent episode of Let's Talk About Public Code, we actually talk about this institutionalization about software with Astor and Melin at Open Forum Europe. And you find Let's Talk About Public Code wherever you find podcasts. Coming back. The way software affects policy, on the other hand, is hard to say if the software is proprietary and closed. And often, too often, that is the case. Even if it sometimes is built on open source packages underneath, there might be a layer of proprietary things or on top that obscures everything. And we think that it's an absolute necessary that governments have technological sovereignty so they can shape the functioning of public software just like they can shape policy legally formulated into laws. A software provider might think that not all the requested changes that a public organization comes up with are in scope with their vision of the software. But it turns out in a democracy, policy cannot by default be out of scope. And for us, like an example, say there's a local party, they are running on the ticket to make parking fees much higher on weekends to discourage people to take the car into the city and make a walkable and livable city. And turns out that's what people want. They vote for this party and they get majority and they come to their council and they crunch all the bureaucracy to get this through. And when they have the laws backing them, they go to the software provider, hey, can we make this change? And the software provider says, no can do, it's out of scope for our business. And I think we can realize that is not how we want things to work. And this is not just a hypothetical, nice to have, or not even a nationalistic market opportunity. It's a very practical viewpoint. So for a real example, 2 years ago in the Netherlands, the parliament decided that they wanted to remove the value-added tax for fruits and vegetables, so to promote a more healthy lifestyle and consumption. That was voted through. They sent it to the tax authority, and the tax authority tried to put 0 in the thing. The software didn't accept it. It was proprietary software, so it wasn't very easy for them to get this change through. And this should be a no-brainer that the software that public organizations use must be able to reflect the values of the society it serves. And in the same way that cities themselves are very different, each city is remarkably different in how they evolved their software adoption, development, and deployment and practice of culture. How can they collaborate? Well, cities have uncovered some recurring design patterns and emerging needs among civil servants. Not only for physical artifacts, but also for many types of digital tools and processes. And forward-thinking cities are already building public digital infrastructure. Now, I'm not using it in the exact same definition that were used in the last talk. Now I'm talking more broadly here, for themselves. And some of these are even open, but perhaps not really reusable yet. And they need to be reusable and collaborative because there's an enormous potential. For example, in Netherlands, where we are based, there are about 340 municipalities. Imagine that they all collaborated on the same code base, how much effort could go into there. And not only in terms of investments and money, but also the expertise, user experience from all these civil servants. And then you just add a few more European countries and their municipalities, and suddenly you have thousands of organizations that could come in. And then you add all the world, and I think we're talking about tens of thousands of, maybe even hundreds of thousands of this level. And thanks to that already established scale of public organizations in the world, scaling up the reuse and also later the collaboration on this public code could be start of some of the largest collaborative open source code bases we have ever seen. But it's perhaps not that easy as making things open only. Because just like there's Italian food or French cinema, software also has some kind of terroir. It's one of the most culturally situated things humans can produce. It comes all out of our mind into this thing. And very often, almost unavoidable, unless very good care is taken, local artifacts will creep into the code base. A very obvious and maybe too blatant example is that they are often made in their local language. How would you feel if you deployed a code base and this is how it looked when you were supposedly creating a new item? Well, unless you speak Swedish like me, you're probably confused and disappointed. Now, I'm not hanging out Wikidata, Wikibase, MediaWiki here because they already solved this particular problem, this issue. You can just as easily get it in English or I guess a couple of hundred languages. But also, it would be nice if you could style the same software to be used in a totally different context. Who would want to implement a code base in their municipality if it had another municipality logo up in the top left corner? That would be feeling very weird if you take the City of Amsterdam software and deploying it in London. And of course, the users would be very confused. And more interestingly, perhaps, they might be implementing or be needing local policies or adaptations. For example, how Amsterdam always takes waterways and canals into account in a way that Las Vegas would never even think about. There's something ingrained in their thinking of how a society works, and that will creep in the code base unless you really think about it. And then, of course, you can have a code base that might be reusable in theory, but there's no sign of anyone actually reusing them, or there's no sign of collaboration. It's all empty. You ask a question and you get no responses. Or even worse, there might be no documentation at all. You come to a code base and it just says add a README, and there's nothing. This is our code base, so I'm not hanging out anyone else here either. So these were some really obvious examples, and there are many more with a lot more nuance to them, but yet important. We have identified for now 112 different things that can help or hinder collaboration. And if we can address all of these, then we can truly start sharing and collaborating. And we sorted these 112 things, methods, or problems into 16 criteria, sort of like an area with related requirements. And I'm not going to go through all of these in detail. I'm just going to let you glance at this for a while, and you probably see that these are probably reasonable headers somehow if you want to make collaboration. And basically, together, they sort of like cover 4 areas. Is it theoretically possible to collaborate with you? Is the code publicly available? Sometimes you hear something is open source, but you never find the code. Can you find the backlog so you know what people are working on? Can you file a new issue? Is there a roadmap so you know you're not going in the totally wrong direction? Or are you developing in a walled garden, and if you do you just throw the code over that wall and hope that someone finds it and picks it up at each release? Do you tell the world how you would like to collaborate? Are there particular ways or standards that you want a contribution coming in to have for you to accept it? Then you need to specify that so you're not just blankly rejecting it. And do you explain the details about the code base? What it does, what the goals it tries to achieve are, and what technology you use and want to use to reach those goals. And do you have a process that supports collaboration? Or will there be a lot of friction if someone from outside your organization tries to collaborate with you? So these are sort of like the 4 basic areas that these define. And we collected these requirements and criteria into the standard for public code. And you can find it online at standard.publiccode.net, or you can come to our table up there and get a paper copy. Here you see some early versions. Last month we released 0.8.0. And we build this together with public organizations and continuously develop it. We have perhaps an average of a release every half a year, but it's very organic when we feel that there's something substantial. And our philosophy when building this is that it should not contain any surprises. It should be a collection of already established good practices in the open source community. We hope that whoever you are in your code-based community are meeting most of these requirements already, but it's almost just as likely that there are some that you're not, because you're in the real world with deadlines, limited budgets, and so forth. So you have taken some shortcuts. And you probably wish that you meet more of these requirements, because that would make you proud of your code base. And the main purpose of this standard that sets it apart from other technical standards is to enable public organizations to collaborate on a code base. Our thesis is that if you comply with the standard, it should be easy for anyone to collaborate with you. And as a result, also to replicate it. We see it the other way around. Replication is a necessary means for collaboration. So the goal is not replication, it is a requirement. It is an open standard, of course, and you have to use open standards to meet it. You can start using it immediately if you want to. You don't need us for that. We put this out to the world under CC0. Reuse it, adapt it if needed. But if you see something here that is not resonating with you, is this really a best practice? Or is there something in my public organization, perhaps in a specific jurisdiction, that say, oh, we cannot do this because of some reason or law or something? Please submit your opinions and proposals to the main repository so we can, so that the entire community can benefit from it. But you could, of course, just adapt it as you go yourself. And of course, not all requirements are equally important. Here you see some examples of different levels of requirements. We used the very well-known RFC 2119 for the levels. And what's important to know here is that musts are, of course, must, but shoulds are strong shoulds. So you should have a very good documented reason to not meet it, whereas optional are optional. And in the standard, there's 46 musts, 51 shoulds, and 15 optionals. And perhaps a little bit unusual for a standard, we also have some guidance what different roles in your organizations needs to do. And we specify that for policymakers, management, and developers and designers. And we think this is important because buy-in from one of these is not enough to get a full adoption into the code base and to the workflow. We have a review template for this. There's a checklist available. We do list at standard-compliant-publiccode.net a list of all compliant code bases and which exact commit they are compliant with. Right now, it's a list of 0, but it's still technically a list. No one has completely met everything yet. We do have also a list of all code bases that have a public commitment that they want to meet this. If you want to make a quick self-evaluation, just 10 yes or no questions to see, am I in the right way? You can go here. We also have the same link up at our table. And that will make you see, is it worth doing all the 112 requirements assessments? Or should we do some more homework before we go to that? And I talked about the commitment here. We think that is very important to show that publicly, because that sets some expectations for coming contributions to your code base, that everyone should also try to meet this standard at the same time. Now, we're not very descriptive in how to solve things in the different, we say that you need to solve things. And sort of like as a companion today to that, we have a community implementation guide where we show examples. This is how someone solved the security issue or requirement. And if you use some of these, you should almost feel like, oh, we're using the best practices, we're almost like pre-approved. The authoritative language for the standard itself is English. We already have a translation to Spanish. The Danish one is in review. Traditional Chinese is almost done, and Swedish and Finnish just started. Those will be sort of like community-provided courtesy translations. So the English will always be leading here. And just a final plug, we also have created a governance game that we give away at our table to help you figure out how does the governance in our codebase work. And with that, I'll take questions.